A boy was found alone in the park holding a photo. When they saw the photo, everyone was shocked. The afternoon sun bathed Central Park in a golden light, casting long shadows that danced among the century-old trees. Children laughed, running around the playground, while elderly couples strolled calmly along the well-kept paths. It was a day like any other in this green refuge in the heart of the city, until it wasn't. Mary Johnson, a retired teacher of 65, was the first to notice something strange. Her eyes, still sharp despite her age, caught an unusual movement near the old oak tree in the center of the park. There, sitting alone on the grass, was a boy. It wasn't uncommon to see children in the park, but there was something about this scene that made Mary stop in her tracks. The boy wasn't playing. There were no parents around. He was just there, motionless, staring intently at something in his hands. "Hello, dear," Mary called softly, approaching cautiously. "Are you all right? Where are your parents?" The boy looked up, revealing a young face marked by an expression that seemed too old for his age. He didn't respond, just clutched the object in his hands tighter to his chest. It was then that Mary saw what he was holding. It was a photograph, crumpled and worn at the edges, as if it had been handled countless times. "Can I see that, dear?" she asked gently, extending her hand. Reluctantly, the boy handed over the photo. Mary examined it and felt her heart clench. The image showed a baby, no more than a few months old, lying on a dirty mattress on the floor of a dilapidated house. The walls in the background were peeling, and through a broken window, a grey and threatening sky could be seen. The baby in the photo looked directly at the camera with large, frightened eyes, an expression of fear and confusion that seemed too mature for such a small being. Mary looked back at the boy, noticing for the first time the similarity between his eyes and those of the baby in the photo. "Is this you?" she asked softly. The boy nodded silently, a single tear rolling down his cheek. At that moment, a group of young people passing by noticed the unusual scene. "Hey, what's going on?" one of them asked, approaching. Mary, still holding the photo, showed it to the group. There was a chorus of gasps and exclamations of shock. "My God, how horrible. Who would do this to a child? Someone needs to call the police." The news spread quickly through the park. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered around the boy and Mary. Smartphones were pulled out, photos were taken, text messages were sent frantically. The buzz grew, a mix of indignation, concern, and, in some cases, morbid curiosity. "What's your name, dear?" Mary asked the boy, trying to stay calm amid the growing chaos. "Luke," he replied, so low that Mary had to lean in to hear. "Luke," she repeated, feeling a wave of protectiveness toward the boy. "Don't worry, we'll help you." Meanwhile, a few yards away, Charles Smith, a middle-aged lawyer who was on his daily run in the park, was already on the phone with the authorities. "Yes, in Central Park, near the big oak tree," he said urgently. "A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, alone. There's a photo. It's hard to explain, but you need to see this. Please come quickly." As the news spread, more and more people joined the crowd. Theories began to circulate. Some speculated that the boy was a street child. Others whispered about possible abuse. A woman swore she had seen Luke's face on a missing child poster weeks ago. Luke himself seemed oblivious to the turmoil around him. His eyes were fixed on the photo that Mary still held, as if it contained all the secrets of the universe. Sirens began to sound in the distance, announcing the imminent arrival of the police. The crowd stirred, some moving away nervously, others coming closer, eager to see what would happen next. Mary knelt beside Luke, putting a protective arm around him. "It's all right," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was comforting the boy or herself. "We'll figure out what's going on." As the sirens approached, Luke finally spoke again, his voice almost inaudible amid the chaos. "I just wanted to find my home," he said, his eyes still fixed on the photo of a past he could barely remember. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the park. As the red and blue lights of police cars began to flash among the trees, one thing became clear to everyone present. The peaceful afternoon in the park had turned into the beginning of a mystery that would shake the city to its core. And at the center of it all, a lonely boy and a worn-out photo. both holding secrets that no one could yet imagine. The buzz in Central Park did not diminish with the arrival of the authorities. On the contrary, the presence of police cars and an ambulance only intensified the atmosphere of tension and curiosity that hung in the air like a dense fog. Detective Anne Williams, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes and graying hair tied in a severe bun, was the first to cross the makeshift cordon. Her gaze swept the scene, quickly assessing the situation before approaching Mary and Luke. "Good evening," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm Detective Williams. Can you tell me what happened here?" As Mary recounted the events, Anne knelt to be at eye level with Luke. "Hello, Luke," she said softly. "Can I see the photo you have?" Luke hesitated, his fingers tightening around the edge of the photograph. After a moment of tense silence, he extended his trembling hand. Anne examined the image, her face a mask of professionalism. But those close enough could see a flicker of shock in her eyes before she could hide it. "Luke," she asked carefully, "do you know where this photo came from?" The boy shook his head. I've always had it," he murmured. At that moment, a young social worker, Peter Brown, approached. "Detective," he said quietly, "perhaps it would be better to continue this at the station. The crowd is getting restless." Anne nodded, noticing the curious looks and smartphones pointed in her direction. "Luke," she said, "we need to go to a quieter place to talk. Is that all right?" As Luke was gently led to the police car, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Wild theories began to spread like wildfire. "I heard he's the son of an important politician," whispered a woman to her friend. "Nonsense," replied a nearby man. "I bet it's a child trafficking case." Mary watched the scene with a knot in her stomach. Something about that boy and that photo disturbed her deeply. Before Luke was taken away, she approached Detective Williams. "Please," she pleaded, "keep me informed. I feel like I need to help somehow." Anne studied Mary's face for a moment before nodding. "Leave your contact with the officer over there," she said, pointing to a nearby policeman. "So we'll get in touch if we need more information." As the police cars drove away, their sirens now silent, the park slowly began to empty. But the story of Luke, the mysterious boy with the shocking photo, was already spreading through the city like a virus. At the station, Luke sat alone in a child-friendly interrogation room, his eyes still fixed on the photo now protected in a plastic evidence bag on the table. On the other side of the one-way glass, Anne and Peter watched the boy in silence. "We've checked the missing children database," Peter said, breaking the silence. "No matches so far." Anne frowned. "And the photo? Any clues about its origin?" Peter shook his head. "Nothing yet. It looks old, maybe 20 years or more. We're analyzing it to see if we can get more details." Anne sighed, her eyes never leaving Luke's solitary figure. "There's something very strange about this story, Peter. A boy appearing out of nowhere, with a photo like that. It's not normal." "What do we do now?" Peter asked. "Now," Anne said, straightening up, "we start digging. Every detail, every clue, no matter how small, because I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface of something much bigger." Meanwhile, in the streets of the city, Luke's story was spreading rapidly. On social media, hashtags like Tor Parkboy and Tor Photo Mystery were going viral. Local journalists rushed to cover the story, while politicians and community leaders issued statements of concern. In a modest apartment across town, Mary Johnson couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to Luke and that disturbing photo. Picking up her tablet, she began to research old missing children cases in the area. As the night wore on, one thing became clear. Luke's appearance in the park was not just an isolated incident. It was the beginning of something that would shake the city to its foundations, exposing long-buried secrets and testing the bonds of a community that believed itself united. And at the center of it all, a lonely boy and a faded photo, both holding secrets that were just beginning to surface. Morning arrived in the city with a thin mist and a palpable tension in the air. At the central police station, Detective Anne Williams was hunched over her desk, her tired eyes fixed on the enlarged photo that had disturbed so many people's sleep the night before. The image, now enlarged and digitally enhanced, revealed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The baby, who Anne now suspected was Luke, was lying on a torn mattress, his large, frightened eyes fixed on the camera. But it was the background of the image that now captured Anne's attention. "Peter," she called to her assistant, who was entering the room with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Look at this." Peter leaned over Anne's shoulder, his eyes following the detective's finger pointing to an almost imperceptible detail in the corner of the photo. "Is that—" he began, incredulous. Anne nodded gravely. "A crest, partially visible, but definitely an official crest." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. An official crest in a photo depicting such poverty and neglect was not just a contradiction, it was potentially explosive. Meanwhile, across town, Mary Johnson had not slept. Her living room was covered in old newspaper clippings and printouts of online articles. Her eyes, red from exhaustion, frantically scanned the headlines. "Illegal adoption scandal shakes region, 1995. Children disappear from poor community, 1998. Local politician accused of involvement in child trafficking scheme, 2000. Mary felt her heart race. The dates, the events, everything seemed to fit into a sinister pattern pointing to something much larger than the appearance of a lonely boy in the park. Back at the station, Luke was waking up in the makeshift room they had prepared for him. His eyes immediately searched for the photo now stored as evidence. The social worker, Sandra, entered with a gentle smile and a plate of breakfast. "Good morning, Luke," she said softly. "Did you sleep well?" Luke just nodded, his eyes never leaving the evidence folder where he knew his photo was stored. Sandra followed his gaze and sighed. "Luke," she began carefully, "can we talk about the photo? Do you remember where it came from?" For a moment it seemed that Luke wouldn't respond. Then, in a voice almost inaudible, he murmured, "It's always been with me. It's the only thing I have." Sandra's heart ached. Before she could say anything more, the door opened and Anne entered, her face a mixture of determination and concern. "Sandra, I need a moment with Luke," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Alone with the boy, Anne knelt to be at eye level with him. "Luke," she said gently, "we discovered something in your photo. Something important. Can you remember anything about the place where the photo was taken? Any detail?" Luke frowned, concentrating intensely. For a moment, Anne thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he began to speak. There was a smell," he said, his voice trembling slightly, like old books and something sweet. Anne felt a shiver run down her spine. The smell of old books could indicate a file or library, and the sweet smell, perfume, perhaps. Her mind raced with possibilities. Meanwhile, in the corridors of power in the city, doors were closing in urgent meetings. The mayor, a middle-aged man named Richard Brown, was in his office, his face pale as he spoke on the phone. "No, we can't let this come to light," he whispered furiously. "I'll do whatever it takes, but keep this story contained." Back at the station, Anne was about to ask Luke another question when her phone rang. It was the forensic lab. "Detective Williams," the voice on the other end of the line was urgent. "We analyzed the composition of the photo paper. It's a specific type used only in official documents until the early 2000s. Anne felt the weight of this information settle in her stomach. Official documents, the partially visible crest, the smell of old books mentioned by Luke. Everything pointed in a direction she barely dared to consider. Looking at Luke, who watched her with large, frightened eyes, Anne knew she was on the verge of something much bigger and much more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "Thank you," she said into the phone, her voice firm despite the turmoil in her mind. "Keep investigating. Leave no stone unturned." As she hung up, Anne looked once more at Luke. The boy seemed so small and vulnerable, carrying the weight of a mystery that could shake the very foundations of the city. "Don't worry, Luke," she said, more to herself than to the boy. "We'll find out the truth, no matter the cost." Outside the station, the city buzzed with speculation and conspiracy theories. On social media, the hashtag #TruthAboutLuke was becoming viral. Journalists camped outside the station, eager for any scrap of information. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, someone watched everything unfold with a mix of fear and resignation. The secret kept for so long was about to come to light, and nothing would be the same after that. The photo of a baby in extreme poverty had become the spark for a revelation that promised to shake the city to its foundations, and the story was just beginning. The disappearance of Anna Smith had triggered a wave of unrest that spread to every corner of Blue Rock. What was once a quiet town, known for its tranquility and natural beauty, now found itself plunged into a whirlwind of emotions and questions. The streets, once filled with smiles and carefree conversations, now echoed with worried whispers and suspicious glances. As the days passed without news of the girl, discussions in squares, bars, and family dinner tables began to take a deeper and more unsettling turn. Anna Smith's case had removed the veil-covering problems long ignored by most residents. "How is it possible for a child to just disappear like that?" questioned Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman with grey hair, sitting on her usual bench in the central square. "This just shows how we are failing our children." Her friend, Marlene, nodded in agreement. "It's true. How many other children are out there, alone and vulnerable, while we turn a blind eye?" Conversations like this multiplied throughout the town, bringing to light issues of child abandonment and social inequality that, although always present, were rarely discussed openly. In Mr. Johnson's bar, a group of men debated heatedly. "Have you noticed how many children are left alone at home while their parents work?" asked John, a local school teacher. "It's not neglect, it's pure necessity. Families can barely make ends meet." "And what about the children living in the poorer areas of town?" added Peter, a social worker. "Many barely have enough to eat, let alone someone to take care of them all day." These discussions began to reveal a side of Blue Rock that many preferred to ignore. The image of a perfect and harmonious town was unraveling, revealing deep cracks in its social structure. Meanwhile, local authorities struggled to maintain control of the situation. Mayor Robert Brown called a press conference in an attempt to calm the population. "I want to assure all citizens of Blue Rock that we are doing everything in our power to find little Anna Smith," he declared, with a serious expression on his face. "Our police forces are working tirelessly, and I ask for everyone's cooperation in this difficult time." However, his words seemed empty to many of those present. A journalist raised her hand and asked the question on everyone's mind. "Mr. Mayor, how do you respond to accusations that the City Hall has neglected the poorer areas of town, leaving many children in vulnerable situations?" The mayor hesitated for a moment, visibly uncomfortable. "These accusations are unfounded. Our administration has been consistently investing in social programs," and his words were interrupted by voices of protest from the back of the room. A group of residents from the peripheral areas had attended the conference, carrying signs denouncing the lack of daycare centers, full-time schools, and effective social assistance programs. The authorities' attempt to control the narrative was clearly failing. With each official statement, more questions arose, and the population's trust in the institutions deteriorated rapidly. Amid this climate of distrust and uncertainty, it didn't take long for theories and speculations to begin to emerge among the residents. On social media, in WhatsApp groups, and in street conversations, the most varied hypotheses about Anna Smith's disappearance came to life. "I heard it was an organized kidnapping by a child trafficking gang," whispered a woman to her neighbor while waiting in line at the supermarket. "Nonsense," replied the other. "My cousin, who works in the police, told me they suspect someone important in town. That's why they're covering up the case." Other, even more fantastic theories began to circulate. Some talked about secret rituals conducted in the caves near the town. Others suggested that the girl had been taken by extraterrestrials, recalling an alleged UFO sighting years ago. Mary, Anna Smith's mother, watched all this with a mix of pain and disbelief. Each new theory, each speculation, was like a knife in her heart. She knew that somewhere behind all this noise was the truth about her daughter, waiting to be discovered. The local church, led by Father Anthony, became a meeting point for those seeking comfort and answers. The priest tried to maintain a balance between offering hope and addressing the social issues that the case had brought to light. "We must pray for Anna Smith and her family," he said in one of his sermons, "but we must also look within ourselves and our community. How can we take better care of each other? How can we protect our children?" His words touched many hearts but also provoked heated discussions. Some members of the congregation argued that the church should do more, such as offering shelter for children at risk. Others contended that this was the government's responsibility. Meanwhile, in schools, teachers struggled to deal with the fear and anxiety of the children. Many students, scared by Anna Smith's disappearance, feared they might be next. Parents, in turn, became overprotective, with some even stopping sending their children to school. The principal of the school where Anna Smith studied, Lucy Johnson, decided to organize a meeting with parents and teachers to discuss the situation. "We cannot let fear paralyze our community," she said. "We need to work together to create a safe environment for our children without depriving them of their childhood." The meeting, though tense, was an important first step. Parents and educators discussed practical measures, such as creating a system to accompany children on their way to and from school and implementing awareness programs about safety. However, for every step taken towards community unity, there seemed to be another that divided it further. The social and economic differences, previously ignored or minimized, were now laid bare. A group of residents from the wealthier areas of town began to push for more security, demanding the installation of surveillance cameras and increased police patrols. Meanwhile, residents of the poorer areas protested, arguing that such measures would only serve to criminalize them further. Anna Smith's case had become a catalyst, exposing the deep fractures in Blue Rock society. Social inequality, child abandonment, the lack of infrastructure in peripheral areas, all these problems, long existing, were now at the center of attention. As the search for Anna Smith continued, the town was forced to face issues that went far beyond the disappearance of a single child. It was a moment of collective self-reflection, painful but necessary. Amid all this turmoil, signs of hope also emerged. Volunteer groups organized to conduct searches, distribute flyers, and offer support to Anna Smith's family. Others began discussing projects to improve the lives of children in the poorer areas, such as creating community centers and mentorship programs. Local journalist Beatrice White decided to start a series of investigative reports on the situation of children in Blue Rock. "We cannot let this tragedy pass without learning something," she said in her first article. "It's time to look honestly at our town and ask ourselves, are we really taking care of our children?" As the days turned into weeks, Blue Rock continued its search not only for Anna Smith, but also for answers to much broader questions. The town was in a process of deep, painful, but potentially transformative questioning. Anna Smith's disappearance had removed the veil from a reality that many preferred to ignore. Now, confronted with this reality, the residents of Blue Rock had a choice to make: continue as before, pretending the problems didn't exist, or face them head-on and work together for real change. The future of Blue Rock and its children would depend on this choice. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Luke's room, gently illuminating the face of the boy who slept restlessly. Slowly, his eyes opened, revealing a look that carried a maturity beyond his years. Luke sat up in bed, his gaze wandering around the room decorated with superhero posters and shelves filled with books and toys. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, as if expecting to wake up somewhere else in another life. "Luke, dear, breakfast is ready," Helena, his adoptive mother, called down the hallway. Slowly, Luke got up and walked to the kitchen, where he found Helena making pancakes, his favorite dish. Charles and his adoptive father were sitting at the table, reading the newspaper with a worried expression. "Good morning, champ," Charles said, lowering the newspaper and forcing a smile. "Did you sleep well?" Luke nodded silently, sitting at the table. Helena placed a plate of pancakes in front of him, gently stroking his hair. "Are you all right, my love?" she asked, noticing the distant expression on her son's face. "Yes, Mum," Luke replied automatically, although his eyes told a different story. The Silver family had adopted Luke 5 years ago when he was only 3 years old. Helena and Charles, a middle-class couple who couldn't have biological children, had instantly fallen in love with the boy with big eyes and a shy smile. In the years that followed, they had strived to give Luke all the love and comfort they could. The boy had his own room, attended a good school, played sports, and had friends. At first glance, his life seemed perfectly normal and happy. However, the contrast between Luke's current life and the image in the photo now circulating the town was stark. While the baby in the photo was surrounded by poverty and neglect, today's Luke lived in a comfortable house, with loving parents and all the opportunities they could provide. After breakfast, Luke prepared for school. As he tied the laces of his new sneakers, he couldn't help but think of the barefoot baby in the photo. Who was that child? How had he ended up there? On the way to school, Luke noticed the curious glances of the neighbors. Some whispered to each other, others pointed discreetly. The news about the mysterious photo had spread quickly, and now everyone seemed to see Luke with different eyes. At school, the situation was no different. As he walked down the halls, Luke could hear fragments of conversations. It's him, the boy from the photo. Do you think he remembers anything? Poor thing. It must have been terrible. Luke tried to ignore it, focusing on his classes and friends. But the questions, the speculations, seemed to follow him like a shadow, impossible to escape. During recess, his best friend Matthew approached hesitantly. "Hey Luke, is it true what they're saying? About the photo and everything?" Luke felt a lump in his throat. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? I don't know, Matthew. It's complicated." Matthew nodded, looking uncomfortable. "So as well, if you want to talk, I'm here, okay?" Luke forced a smile, grateful for the friendship but feeling more alone than ever. In the afternoon, back home, Luke faced another emotional challenge. Helena and Charles had decided it was time for a frank conversation about the situation. "Luke," Helena began softly, sitting next to him on the couch, "we know this whole situation must be very difficult for you. We want you to know that we are here to support you, no matter what happens." Charles joined them, his voice grave but gentle. "Son, if you have any questions, anything you want to know about your past, you can ask us. We promise to be as honest as possible." Luke looked at his adoptive parents, feeling a mix of love and fear. He wanted to ask so many things. Who were his biological parents? Why had he been abandoned? How had he ended up with Helena and Charles? But the words seemed stuck in his throat. Instead, he just nodded, silent tears streaming down his cheeks. Helena hugged him tightly, her own tears mingling with her son's. "We love you so much, Luke. Never forget that." That night, lying in his bed, Luke couldn't sleep. His mind was filled with images: the baby in the photo, his adoptive parents, the curious faces of neighbors and classmates. He wondered how his life would have been if he hadn't been adopted. Would he have grown up in poverty? Would he be alone? Silently, Luke got up and went to the window. Looking at the stars, he wondered if somewhere, perhaps looking at the same sky, were the people who had left him behind. Did they think of him? Did they regret it? The following days were an emotional whirlwind for Luke. At school, he tried to maintain normalcy, but it was hard to ignore the stares and whispers. Some classmates avoided him, as if his mysterious past were contagious. Others, driven by curiosity, bombarded him with questions he didn't know how to answer. At home, Luke noticed the constant worry in Helena and Charles's eyes. They tried to keep the routine, to make him feel safe and loved. But there was a tension in the air, a feeling that something fundamental had changed. One afternoon, while doing his homework, Luke accidentally overheard a conversation between his adoptive parents. What if someone comes to claim him?" Helena's voice trembled. "Let's not think about that now," Charles replied, trying to sound confident. "Luke is our son, no matter what happens." Those words hit Luke like a punch in the stomach. The possibility of being separated from the only family he knew was terrifying. But at the same time, a small part of him couldn't help but wonder about his origins, about the people who had brought him into the world. At night, alone in his room, Luke took out a photo album. On the pages, he saw images of his life with the Silvers, his first day of school, birthdays, family trips, smiles, hugs, moments of joy frozen in time. Turning the pages, Luke came to a particular photo that had always intrigued him. In it, He must have been about 4 years old, newly arrived in the Silver family. His eyes in that photo were different, scared, distrustful, like those of the baby in the mysterious photo. Looking at that image, Luke felt a connection with his younger self, with the baby in the photo that had caused such a stir. It was as if, for the first time, he could see the thread that connected his past to his present. At that moment, Luke made a decision. He didn't know what the future held, what secrets his past hid, but he knew that no matter what happened, he would face everything with courage, because now he understood that his story, no matter how complicated, was part of him, and he was determined to discover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. With this thought, Luke closed the album and went back to bed. Tomorrow would be another day, full of challenges and questions. But for the first time since this whole story began, he felt ready to face them. Detective Anne Williams frowned, her tired eyes scanning the dusty files spread across her desk. For days she had been diving headfirst into the city's old records, searching for any clue that could shed light on the mystery surrounding Luke. "So I look at this," she murmured to her partner, Detective Robert, pointing to a yellowed newspaper clipping. 1995, baby found in Trash Shock's residence. Robert leaned in to read. "Damn, that's terrible, but what does it have to do with our case?" Anne pushed more papers in his direction. "It's not an isolated case. 1997, 1999, 2001. There's a pattern here. Abandoned babies, all between 3 and 6 months old, all under suspicious circumstances." As the detectives deepened their investigation, a disturbing picture began to form. These weren't just sporadic cases of abandonment, but something that seemed systematic, almost organized. "There's more," Anne continued, her voice low and tense. "I noticed something strange in the birth records of those years. There are gaps, children who simply disappear from the records." Robert felt a shiver run down his spine. "You think?" Anne nodded gravely. "I think we're dealing with something much bigger than we initially thought." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, journalist Marina Light was following her own line of investigation. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and now they were screaming that there was more to this story than met the eye. Marina arranged a meeting with an anonymous source in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. The woman who sat across from her looked nervous, her eyes constantly scanning the place. "What do you have for me?" Marina asked quietly. The woman hesitated, then spoke in an almost inaudible whisper. "You need to investigate the Johnson and Brown families. There are old rumors about children who disappeared." Marina felt her heart race. The Johnson and Brown families were two of the most influential in the city, with connections reaching the highest levels of state power. "What kind of rumors?" The source swallowed hard. "They say there were deals at exchanges. Some of those abandoned children. They weren't from poor families. Some were from wealthy families, but inconvenient." While the adults unearthed the dark secrets of the city's past, Luke faced his own journey of discovery. Each new piece of information that leaked, each look of pity or curiosity he received, pushed him deeper into a well of doubts and questions. One afternoon, after school, Luke decided to visit the public library. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he felt an almost desperate need to understand more about his own story. The librarian, a kind lady named Mrs. Clara, noticed the lost boy among the shelves. "Can I help you, dear?" Luke hesitated. I wanted to know more about adoption and about abandoned children." Mrs. Clara's eyes softened with understanding. She guided him to a specific section, carefully selecting some books. "Here, these might be a good start. But remember, Luke, sometimes the answers we seek aren't in books, but within ourselves." In the following weeks, Luke devoured everything he could find on the subject. He read about psychology, the effects of abandonment on children, the challenges faced by adoptive families. Each new piece of information was like a piece of a giant puzzle, but the complete picture still remained obscure. One night, unable to sleep, Luke decided to do something he had been contemplating for days. Silently, he sneaked into his adoptive parents' office. With his heart pounding, he began to rummage through the drawers, looking for any document that could shed light on his past. At the bottom of a drawer, hidden under piles of papers, he found a folder simply marked Luke. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside were his birth certificate, adoption documents, and a letter. A handwritten letter, the paper yellowed with time. Luke felt his heart stop as he read the first lines. "To whoever finds this baby, I have no choice. Please take care of him. His name is Luke. He was born on March 15th. I love him more than anything. But I can't keep him safe. One day I hope to explain." The rest of the letter was stained, the words illegible. Luke felt hot tears streaming down his face. This was proof that he had been loved, that his abandonment was not due to lack of love, but for some mysterious and seemingly urgent reason. Suddenly, Luke heard a noise. Quickly, he put everything back in place and ran back to his room, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and questions. The next morning, during breakfast, Luke observed his adoptive parents with new eyes. Did they know about the letter? What else did they know that they weren't telling? "Mom, Dad," he began hesitantly, Do you know anything about my biological parents?" Helena and Charles exchanged worried looks. "Why are you asking this now, son?" Charles asked gently. Luke took a deep breath. "I need to know who I am, where I came from, why I was abandoned." Helena stood up and hugged Luke tightly. "Oh dear, we always knew this day would come. There are things we don't know, and others we promised never to tell, but know this. You are loved, Luke. By your biological parents, who had to give you up, and by us monks who had the blessing of having you in our lives." Helena's words, though comforting, only served to increase Luke's determination. He now knew, with absolute certainty, that there was a mystery in his past. A mystery that involved not only him but possibly other children, other families. Meanwhile, at the station, Anne Williams received a call that made her blood run cold. "Detective," the voice on the other end of the line was urgent. "We found something, a mass grave with remains of babies. Some seem to be decades old." Anne felt the weight of this revelation settle on her shoulders. Luke's case had turned into something much bigger, much more sinister than anyone could have imagined. As night fell over the city, the secrets of the past began to emerge from the shadows. For Luke, for the detectives, for everyone involved, it became clear that the search for the truth was just beginning. And that this truth, once finally revealed, would have the power to shake the city's foundations to its core. The sun rose over a transformed city. What had once been an apparently united community now found itself torn apart by invisible lines of tension and distrust. Luke's case, the boy with the mysterious photo, had become the catalyst for a profound and irreversible change in the social and political dynamics of New Hope. In the central square, traditionally a place of peaceful gatherings and community festivities, now echoed with raised voices. On one side, a group of residents held signs demanding justice for Luke and all forgotten children. On the other, supporters of the town's traditional families shouted slogans defending the preservation of New Hope's order and reputation. Maria Santos, a public school teacher, watched the scene with a mix of fascination and concern. "It's incredible how a single case can expose so many wounds that have been hidden for years," she commented to her colleague, John. John nodded gravely. "It's like we've been living in a bubble all this time. Now it's burst, and we're being forced to face our reality." A few blocks away, in the luxurious New Hope Social Club, an emergency meeting was underway. The most influential members of the local elite had gathered to discuss the unfolding crisis. "This is outrageous," thundered Anthony Johnson, patriarch of one of the town's oldest families. "How can they accuse us of negligence? Our family has donated to charities for generations." Edward Brown, a local businessman, tried to calm the tempers. "We need to think strategically. Maybe it's time to increase our investments in social programs to show that we care." "Investments?" scoffed Catherine Williams, a socialite known for her extravagant parties. "Why should we spend our hard-earned money on this? It's not our fault if some people don't know how to take care of their children." Across town, at the headquarters of the Hope Neighborhood Association, the atmosphere was equally tense, but for different reasons. "For years, we've begged for more daycare centers, for support programs for needy families," shouted Mrs. Thompson, a respected community leader. There's now suddenly, everyone wants to talk about child abandonment. Where were these people when our children were starving? Social media buzzed with heated debates. Hashtags like Justice for Luke and Our Town, Our Story competed for local trending topics. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, with some claiming that Luke's case was just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger scheme involving child trafficking and corruption at the highest levels of power. At the town hall, an extraordinary session was convened to discuss the crisis. Mayor Robert Johnson, visibly worn out, tried to maintain his composure while facing a barrage of questions and accusations. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice trembling, "I understand the gravity of the situation we face. I want to assure everyone that we are taking all necessary measures to investigate not only young Luke's case but also any other similar incidents that may have occurred in the past." His words were met with shouts of "liar" and "resign" from the gallery, where ordinary citizens and activists had gathered to follow the session. Councilwoman Lisa Carter, known for her progressive stance, took the microphone. "Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, we can no longer hide behind platitudes and empty promises. Luke's case has exposed a systemic failure in our society. It's time to face the harsh reality. Our town has failed its most vulnerable children, and the elites bear a significant share of the responsibility." Her words provoked an immediate reaction. Some council members stood up and applauded, while others booed and demanded she retract her statement. Meanwhile, on the streets, polarization intensified. Groups began to form, each with its own agenda and vision regarding Luke's case and its broader implications. The Movement for Justice and Truth, led by young activists, organized daily protests in front of the town hall and police station. They demanded a comprehensive and transparent investigation, not just into Luke's case, but into all cases of missing or abandoned children over the past decades. In contrast, the group Tradition and Progress, composed mainly of more conservative members of the community, argued that the case was being exploited by radical elements to destabilize the town's social order. They called for caution and respect for established institutions. A third group, self-named Bridge to the Future, tried to occupy a middle ground, proposing dialogue and gradual reforms. Led by university professors and moderate religious leaders, they organized discussion forums and roundtables, seeking to find consensual solutions to the problems exposed by Luke's case. The local media struggled to maintain objectivity amid the storm of emotions and accusations. The New Hope Daily, the town's traditional newspaper, was accused of bias by both the right and the left, depending on the tone of its reports. Amid all this turmoil, Luke and his adoptive family tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But it was impossible to ignore the changes around them. At school, Luke noticed how some classmates avoided him, while others treated him like a reluctant celebrity. One afternoon, returning home, Luke found a group of reporters camped in front of his house. Flashes went off, and questions were shouted as soon as he appeared. Frightened, he ran inside and finding his adoptive parents in the living room with worried expressions. "This can't go on," said Charles, Luke's adoptive father, hugging his son protectively. "Our boy is not a symbol or a cause. He's just a child who deserves peace." Helena, the adoptive mother, nodded determinedly. "Maybe it's time we spoke out publicly, not to feed this madness, but to ask for respect for our privacy and Luke's." Meanwhile, at the police station, Detective Anne Williams faced her own battle. Pressured by superiors to present quick results and simultaneously dealing with political interference that seemed to arise with each new discovery, she felt as if she were walking through a minefield. "We can't let external pressure compromise our investigation," she told her partner, Detective Robert. "There are children who deserve justice, families who deserve answers. It doesn't matter who is implicated in the end." Robert agreed, but his eyes revealed concern. "I'm with you, Anne, but I fear that the deeper we dig, the more dangerous it becomes. There are powerful people who don't want the truth to come out." As night fell over New Hope, the town seemed to be on the brink of a precipice. The divisions exposed by Luke's case had opened old wounds and created new fissures in the social fabric. Trust in institutions was shaken, and the future seemed uncertain. In homes, streets, bars and cafes, one question hung in the air. How could a town heal when it was so deeply divided? And more importantly, what would be the price of the truth that everyone so desperately sought? As the citizens of New Hope prepared for another day of uncertainty and conflict, one thing was clear: nothing would be the same as before. Luke's case had removed the veil from a reality that many preferred to ignore. And now, for better or worse, everyone would have to face the consequences of decades of secrets and neglect. The town was divided, but perhaps some dared to hope. From this division could come an opportunity for true change and reconciliation. Only time would tell if New Hope could overcome its demons and build a fairer future for all its children. The office of Dr. Beatrice Martin, a renowned lawyer specializing in children's rights, buzzed with activity. Piles of documents covered every available surface, while a team of young lawyers and interns worked frantically, preparing for what promised to be one of the most important hearings in New Hope's recent history. "We have to be ready for anything," Beatrice declared, her firm voice echoing through the room. Luke's case is not just about one child. It's about all the children who have been neglected, abandoned or forgotten by our system. The news that national and international children's rights organizations were getting involved in the case had sent shockwaves through the town. Little New Hope, previously known only for its tranquility and natural beauty, was now under the world's spotlight. On the other side of town, at the local UNICEF office, an emergency meeting was underway. Clara Rodriguez, the organization's representative, spoke urgently to those present. "Luke's case has exposed systemic failures that go far beyond a single town," she explained. "We are seeing similar patterns in other regions. This could be the turning point we needed to push for real changes in child protection policies across the country." While children's rights organizations mobilized their resources, another group worked in the shadows, unearthing long-buried secrets. In a small rented office on the outskirts of town, private investigator Mark Oliver and his team spent sleepless nights connecting dots that, at first glance, seemed unrelated. "Look at this," Mark murmured, pointing to a map covered in colorful markings. "Over the past 30 years, there's been a consistent pattern of missing or abandoned children. But the interesting thing is this: most of the cases coincide with major urban development projects." His assistant, Julia, frowned. "Do you think there's a connection?" Mark nodded gravely. "And it's not just that. Look at these names that repeatedly appear in the documents. Johnson, Chewers, Brown, Williams, all influential families, all involved in some way in these projects." As the investigators deepened their research, surprising connections began to emerge. Mysterious donations to orphanages, rushed adoptions, altered medical records. A dark pattern began to take shape. At the police station, Detective Anne Williams received a call that made her heart race. "Anne," the voice on the other end of the line was urgent. "It's Robert. You won't believe what we've discovered. Remember that retired nurse who mentioned something about altered records? Well, she's decided to talk, and it's big, Anne. Very big." Meanwhile, at the Silver household, Luke faced his own demons. The prospect of having to testify at the public hearing filled him with a fear he could barely express. "What if I don't remember anything?" he asked Helena, his adoptive mother, tears threatening to fall. "What if I disappoint everyone?" Helena hugged him tightly, feeling her own heart break a little. "Oh, my love," she whispered, "you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Your only responsibility is to be true to yourself." Charles, the adoptive father, joined the hug. "We're with you, son, no matter what happens." At the town hall, Mayor Robert Johnson was having his own crisis. Surrounded by advisors and lawyers, he looked like a man on the verge of collapse. "How did we let it get to this point?" he asked. More to himself than to those present. Decades of what? Neglect, corruption. And now it's all going to blow up in our faces. His chief advisor, a middle-aged man named George, tried to calm him. "Sir, we can still control the narrative. Maybe if we offer some concessions, promise reforms." The mayor cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Concessions? Reforms? You don't understand, George. This goes far beyond politics. There are lives at stake. Children's lives." As the day of the hearing approached, The tension in the town reached fever pitch. Rival groups organized demonstrations and counter-demonstrations. The police reinforced security at key points in the town, fearing possible clashes. On the eve of the hearing, a candlelight vigil was organized in the central square. Thousands of people gathered, holding photographs of children who had disappeared over the years. The silence was broken only by the occasional sob of a grieving mother or the low murmur of a prayer. Among the crowd, Mary Johnson, the retired teacher who had found Luke in the park, watched the scene with a mix of hope and apprehension. "I never imagined I would see our town like this," she commented to her neighbor. "It's like we're finally waking up from a long sleep." Behind the scenes, last-minute preparations were being made. Dr. Beatrice Martin rehearsed her opening statement, determined not to let legal tactics obscure the fundamental truth of the case. "This is not just about laws and statutes," she murmured to herself. "It's about justice and about giving a voice to those who have been silenced for too long." At the local hospital, a team of psychologists and social workers prepared to offer emotional support to the testimonies that would be heard. They knew that the revelations to come would be painful, potentially traumatic for many. In the newsroom of the local newspaper, editors debated heatedly about how to cover the event. "We have to be impartial," argued the editor-in-chief. "But we also have a responsibility to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is." As night fell over New Hope, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. In homes, streets, bars, and cafes, people spoke in low, urgent tones about what tomorrow might bring. For Luke, lying in his bed but unable to sleep, the future seemed both frightening and full of possibilities. He knew that somehow his testimony would be crucial, not just for his own case, but for all the other children who had been forgotten or abandoned. "Be brave," he whispered to himself, his adoptive mother's words echoing in his mind. "Be true." At the police station, Anne Williams made a final review of her notes, determined not to let any detail slip by. She knew that powerful forces would be working against her, trying to keep the secrets of the past buried, but she was ready for the fight. "For Luke," she murmured, "and for all the other children." As the town finally fell asleep, a sense of inevitability hung in the air. Tomorrow, secrets would be revealed, truths would be confronted, and nothing in New Hope would ever be the same again. The hearing would not be just a legal trial, it would be a moral reckoning, a chance for an entire town to face its past and, perhaps, find redemption. And at the center of it all was Luke, a boy whose mere existence had triggered an avalanche of change. Tomorrow his voice would be heard, and with it, the voices of countless others who had been silenced for too long. The town waited, holding its breath, for the dawn that would bring the beginning of a new era for New Hope. The sun had barely risen when the first people began to gather in front of the New Hope Forum. The tension in the air was palpable, mixed with an almost feverish anticipation. Journalists from all over the country jostled for the best angles, while police formed a security cordon around the building. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doors of the main auditorium opened. The crowd entered in respectful, almost reverent silence. In the center of the room, a large U-shaped table awaited the members of the Special Commission. In front, a solitary chair, the place where the witnesses would give their testimonies. Judge Albert White, a middle-aged man with piercing eyes, officially opened the session. "We are here today," his voice echoed through the auditorium, "to seek the truth about a case that has shaken the foundations of our community. May justice prevail, and the truth, no matter how painful, come to light." The first testimonies came from social workers and orphanage employees. Their stories, though moving, were only the prelude to what was to come. Then, Dr. Beatrice Martin called her first key witness, Mary Johnson, the retired teacher who had found Luke in the park. Mary stepped up to the stand, visibly nervous but determined. She recounted in detail that fateful day, her voice trembling slightly as she described Luke's frightened look and the shocking photo he carried. That photo, she concluded, did not just show poverty. It showed despair. It showed a secret that someone was desperate to hide. The next to testify was Dr. Charles Brown, a forensic geneticist. His testimony caused the first major stir of the hearing. We conducted DNA tests comparing samples from Luke with a database of prominent families in the town, he explained, his voice clinically neutral. The results are conclusive. Luke has a direct match with the Johnson family. A shocked murmur rippled through the audience. The Johnsons were one of the most powerful and influential families in New Hope, with connections extending to the state capital. Dr. Beatrice, sensing the moment, made her move. I now call as a witness Richard Johnson. The buzz in the room grew as Richard Johnson, the current mayor of New Hope, stood up and slowly walked to the witness chair. His face was pale, his hands trembled slightly. Mr. Johnson, Beatrice began, her voice firm. Do you have any explanation for the genetic match between you and Luke? Richard hesitated, his eyes sweeping the room until they fixed on Luke, who was sitting between his adoptive parents. For a moment, the silence was deafening. He began, his voice almost a whisper. I am Luke's biological father. Chaos erupted in the room. Shouts of indignation, camera flashes, people standing up from their seats. Judge White had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. When silence finally returned, Richard Johnson continued, his voice now firmer, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. 12 years ago, I was a young politician on the rise. I had an affair with a young woman from a humble family, Mary Smith. When she got pregnant, my family pressured me to cover it up. They said a scandal would ruin my career, tarnish the Johnson name. Tears began to stream down Richard's face. I was a coward. I let them convince me. We offered Mary money to disappear, to give the child up for adoption. But she refused. Dr. Beatrice intervened. And what happened then, Mr. Johnson? Richard swallowed hard. My father. He took action. He hired people to pressure Mary, to scare her. I didn't know all the details at the time, I swear. When I realized the extent of what was happening, it was too late. At this moment, Detective Anne Williams stood up, holding an envelope. Your Honor, we have new evidence we would like to present. With the judge's permission, Anne opened the envelope and took out a photograph. It was the same photo that Luke carried the day he was found, but now enlarged and restored. This photo, Anne explained, was taken by Mary Smith on the night she was forced to abandon her son. We managed to recover a message written on the back. The photo was projected on a large screen. On the back, in shaky handwriting, it read, My beloved Luke, may you one day understand that a mother's love sometimes means letting go. I will always be with you, Mom. An audible sob echoed through the room. All eyes turned to Luke, who stared at the image, silent tears running down his face. Richard Johnson continued his testimony, his voice choked with emotion. Mary disappeared that night. Luke was found in front of an orphanage the next day. I never saw them again. I spent the last 12 years trying to convince myself that I had done the right thing, that it was better for everyone. But the truth is, I was a coward, and my son paid the price. The hearing continued with more shocking revelations. Documents were presented showing how the Johnson family had used their influence to cover up the case, how they had manipulated the adoption system to ensure Luke was placed with a suitable family. When it was Luke's turn to testify, the silence in the room was absolute. The boy, visibly shaken but determined, spoke with a maturity beyond his years. I've always felt there was something different about me, about my story, he said, his voice small but firm. Now I know the truth, and it's hard. But I also feel like I can finally start to understand who I am. The reactions in the community were immediate and intense. Outside the forum, crowds gathered, some demanding Richard Johnson's immediate resignation, others calling for a broader investigation into other influential families in the town. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForLuke went viral within minutes. Journalists from all over the country rushed to New Hope, turning the small town into the epicenter of a national scandal. At the end of the hearing, Judge White made a solemn pronouncement. What we witnessed today goes far beyond an individual case. It exposes systemic failures in our institutions, in our society. From now on, a broad and unrestricted investigation will be conducted. No one is above the law, no matter how powerful or influential they are. As the crowd left the forum, the air was charged with conflicting emotions: shock, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. The truth, no matter how painful, was finally coming to light. For Luke and his adoptive family, the future was uncertain. They left the forum surrounded by security, avoiding the press. The boy who had been the catalyst for all this change now faced his own journey of discovery and reconciliation. Richard Johnson, for his part, left the forum as a defeated man, but also, in a way, liberated. He knew he would face severe consequences for his actions, but for the first time in 12 years, he felt he could breathe without the crushing weight of the secret. As night fell over New Hope, one thing was certain: the town would never be the same. The revelations of that day had shaken its foundations, exposing its deepest flaws, but they had also opened the door to something new. A chance for healing, for change, for redemption. Luke's case, which had begun as the mystery of a lonely boy with a photo, had turned into a turning point for an entire community. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, the citizens of New Hope wondered, what would tomorrow bring? The dawn in New Hope brought with it an air of palpable change. The revelations from the previous day's public hearing had shaken the town to its core, leaving its inhabitants in a state of collective shock and introspection. The headline screamed in bold letters, "Mayor Johnson admits paternity of Luke. Child abandonment, scandal rocks New Hope. Town demands answers and change." The streets, usually bustling in the early morning hours, were eerily quiet, as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter in this surprising story. At the Silver household, Luke woke up after a restless night of confusing and revealing dreams. Sitting on his bed, he looked around the room that had been his refuge for the past years. Now, every object seemed to tell a different story, a story of love, but also of well-intentioned secrets and lies. Helena and Charles, his adoptive parents, found him like this, lost in thought. "Luke," Helena called softly, "how are you feeling?" Luke raised his eyes, a mixture of emotions passing across his young face. I don't know," he replied honestly. "It's like I'm two different people at the same time." Charles sat beside his son, placing a comforting arm around him. "But you are who you've always been, Luke. Nothing that happened yesterday changes the fact that you are our son and we love you." Charles's words brought tears to Luke's eyes. "But what if he wants to take me away?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Helena knelt in front of Luke, holding his hands. "No one is going to take you anywhere, my love. You are old enough to decide where you want to stay, and we will fight for you with all our strength." Meanwhile, across town, Richard Johnson faced the consequences of his actions. A crowd gathered in front of the town hall, demanding his immediate resignation. Inside his office, surrounded by advisors and lawyers, Richard looked like a defeated man. "What do I do now?" he asked, more to himself than to those present. His closest advisor, John, replied in a firm voice, "You need to face this head-on, Richard. Admit your mistakes publicly, show genuine remorse, and most importantly, try to make amends with your son." Richard nodded slowly, knowing that the road ahead would be long and difficult. At the police station, Detective Anne Williams coordinated a newly formed task force to investigate other potential cases of abandonment and suspicious adoptions. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," she told her team. "We need to ensure that every child in our town has their story investigated and their voice heard." As the day progressed, the New Hope community began to mobilize. Groups of citizens gathered in squares and community centers, discussing ways to address the issues of child abandonment and social responsibility that Luke's case had brought to light. Mary Johnson, the retired teacher who had found Luke in the park, led one of these groups. "We cannot let this be just another passing scandal," she declared passionately. "We need to turn this tragedy into an opportunity for real change." In the early afternoon, a meeting that would change many lives was about to take place. Luke, accompanied by his adoptive parents and Dr. Beatrice Martin, arrived at a neutral park to meet with Richard Johnson. The moment when biological father and son looked into each other's eyes, without the barriers of secrets between them, was charged with emotion. Richard, visibly nervous, took a step forward. "Luke," he began, his voice choked with emotion, "I know that no apology will ever be enough for what I did. But I want you to know that not a single day has gone by in the last 12 years that I haven't thought about you, about who you might be, about what your life would be like." Luke listened in silence, his eyes moving between Richard and his adoptive parents. Finally, he spoke. "Why didn't you look for me before?" "I didn't." "Why wait until you were forced to tell the truth?" The question hit Richard like a punch. "I was a coward, Luke. I was afraid of the consequences, afraid to face what I had done. But now I just want the chance to get to know you, to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." Helena and Charles watched the scene with a mix of apprehension and compassion. They knew that the road ahead would be complicated, but they were determined to support Luke in any decision he made. Luke took a deep breath, years of repressed emotions coming to the surface. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," he finally said, but maybe we can start slowly, get to know each other." Luke's words, though cautious, were a ray of hope. Richard nodded, tears in his eyes. "It's more than I deserve. Thank you, Luke." In the days and weeks that followed, New Hope witnessed a remarkable transformation. Richard Johnson resigned as mayor, but not before proposing a series of measures to reform the town's adoption and child protection systems. The community came together in surprising ways. A fund to support vulnerable children was created, with donations pouring in from all parts of the town. Mentorship and psychological support programs were established, offering help not only to children but also to families in need. The photo of Luke, which had been the catalyst for all this change, was enlarged and framed, becoming the centerpiece of an exhibition at the town's museum, entitled Truths Revealed. The exhibition told the stories of other children who had gone through similar situations, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of truth and justice. For Luke, the following months were an emotional roller coaster. Therapy sessions helped him process his complex feelings about his identity and origins. Slowly, he began to build a cautious relationship with Richard, meeting regularly for lunches and walks in the park. One sunny afternoon, as they walked together, Richard asked Luke, "Do you think one day you'll be able to call me Dad?" Luke stopped, looking at the horizon for a moment before answering, "Maybe one day. But you need to understand, Richard, Charles is my dad. He and Helena raised me, loved me when you couldn't. That will never change." Richard nodded, understanding. "I respect that, Luke, and I'm grateful to them for giving you the love and care I should have given." As the year drew to a close, New Hope was a transformed town. Luke's case had exposed deep wounds, but had also initiated a process of healing and renewal. In an emotional ceremony, the town inaugurated the Lucas Silva Support Center, a space dedicated to helping children and families in vulnerable situations. Luke, accompanied by his two families, adoptive and biological, cut the inauguration ribbon. Looking at the gathered crowd, Luke saw familiar faces: Mary Johnson, Detective Ann Williams, Dr. Beatrice Martin, and so many others who had played a crucial role in his journey. He felt a wave of gratitude and hope. "This center," Luke said into the microphone, his voice firm and clear, "is more than just a building. It's a symbol that the truth, no matter how painful, has the power to heal and transform. It's a promise that no child in our town will have to face the challenges I faced alone." As applause echoed through the square, Luke felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. His past, present, and future had finally aligned, not in perfect harmony, but in a balance he could accept and grow with. The photo that once symbolized abandonment and secrets now represented hope and renewal. And Luke, the boy whose story had shaken an entire town, was ready to write the next chapter of his life, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience and positive change. As the sun set that night over New Hope, it illuminated a town forever changed, but also forever hopeful. The legacy of Luke's story would continue to shape the community for generations to come, a testament to the power of truth, compassion, and the unbreakable spirit of a child who dared to ask questions and seek answers.